It had been a long year, the kind that grinds you down without you even realizing it. Between the endless HOA meetings, noise complaints from petty neighbors, and the absurd restriction that prohibited him from parking his own RV in his driveway, for more than 24 hours, Adam felt like he was being smothered in his own home. He had worked hard his whole life, built a successful contracting business from the ground up, and now in what was supposed to be his season of peace, he found himself feeling like a prisoner in his own suburban neighborhood. That's why, on a cool Friday morning, Adam packed up his gear, loaded his truck with supplies, hitched the camper, and made the 2-hour drive out to the one place that had never failed to ground him, his grandfather's ranch. Nestled between rolling hills and thick clusters of pine, the ranch sat on a vast stretch of land that had been in his family for 3 generations, but it was the lake that called to him the most. It was a deep, still body of water shaped almost like a crescent moon, hidden in a small valley behind a line of old cottonwoods. It had been his sanctuary as a boy, a place where he learned to fish, swim, and later just breathe. The land was fully his now. When his grandfather passed, he left it all to Adam, every acre, every tree, and the lake itself. It wasn't fancy. There wasn't even a cabin, just a small dock and a fire ring, built from river stones, but that was the point. It was pure, untouched, and most importantly, it was free of any HOA nonsense. He arrived just after noon. The sun filtered through the trees, dappling the water in golden flecks as he pulled his truck up near the edge of the clearing. He took his time setting up. He didn't bother with fancy gear, just a canvas tent, a folding chair, a cooler full of steak and beer, and his fishing pole. There was no cell signal out here, which suited him fine. He lit a small fire and sat beside it with his boots stretched out, listening to the wind as it whispered through the tall grass. As dusk settled over the valley, Adam grilled himself dinner and ate by the water's edge. He felt a familiar calm settle into his bones, something he hadn't felt in years. No barking dogs, no cars honking, no board members sending passive-aggressive emails about trash cans left out too long. Just him, the lake, and the rustle of the world moving as it should. He spent the night in the tent with the lake shimmering under the moonlight, the hoot of a distant owl his only company. It reminded him of summers when he was 10, sitting beside his grandfather, learning how to tie a proper lure. The old man's voice echoed in his mind, not in a haunting way, but like an old favorite song you hadn't heard in a while. The next morning, Adam was up early. He made himself coffee over the fire, then headed to the dock with his fishing rod. The fog was still rising from the surface of the lake, swirling like slow-moving ghosts. The first cast landed clean, the bait slicing through the mist like a bullet. He waited, patient. After about 10 minutes, he reeled in a decent-sized trout. He smiled, not just at the catch, but at the silence that followed. This was why he came here. He didn't even hear the vehicle approach at first. It wasn't until the crunch of tires on gravel interrupted the chirping of birds that he turned his head. A dark SUV rolled up the trail, new, shiny, with tinted windows. It didn't belong here. No one came up this way except him. He frowned, instinctively resting his hand on the utility knife at his side. When the car stopped, 2 people got out. A man in slacks and a polo shirt with a clipboard, and a woman in a pantsuit and heels, both completely out of place. They didn't wave. They didn't smile. They walked straight toward him like they had a schedule to keep, and he was just another line on their to-do list. That's when the man spoke. "Sir, we've had reports of unauthorized camping on HOA-regulated property." Adam blinked. For a second, he thought they were joking, but their stiff expression said otherwise. His fingers curled tighter around the rod in his hand, not in anger, but in disbelief. The piece he had so carefully reclaimed cracked open, replaced by confusion and a flicker of something sharper. This was his land. Every tree, every rock, every inch of it. And somehow the HOA from back in town was standing on his lake, telling him he didn't belong. Adam stood there, still holding his fishing rod, as the 2 strangers from the SUV stared at him like he was a squatter who'd just been caught sleeping under a bridge. The man with the clipboard looked around the area with a scrutinizing eye, as if expecting to see trash scattered across the ground or some sign of illegal activity. The woman, stern and composed, walked toward the fire pit and sniffed slightly, like the lingering scent of burnt wood offended her sensibilities. "I'm going to have to ask you to pack up your belongings and vacate the area," the man said firmly, tapping his pen against the clipboard. "This lake is part of the Cedar Ridge HOA Community Nature Reserve. Camping is strictly prohibited." Adam's brow furrowed, and he let out a slow, confused laugh. "Wait, what? This is my land. I own this entire property. You're standing on my ranch." The woman narrowed her eyes. "We've had multiple complaints from residents who saw you drive in through the back trail. This area is restricted. Your presence here is unauthorized unless you're a Cedar Ridge member who's been approved for limited day use." Adam stared at her, unsure whether to laugh harder or get angry. "Lady, I'm not only a Cedar Ridge resident, I'm the guy who inherited this ranch from my grandfather. This lake? It's on my deed. I've got papers that show I own everything, from the main trail all the way to the fence line at the ridge. You're the ones trespassing." The man shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, there's no need to become aggressive. We're just enforcing community policies. If you believe there's an error, you're welcome to bring it up at the next HOA meeting." Adam's jaw clenched. He hadn't come out here to be roped into another HOA debate. He came to escape the politics, the pettiness, the constant micromanagement of his life. Now here were two strangers acting like they had authority over land they didn't even understand. He set his fishing rod down slowly and stepped forward. "Let me make something crystal clear," he said, voice low but firm. "I don't need your permission to be here. I don't need a day pass or a meeting slot. I own this land outright, and I've got the deed, maps, and surveys to prove it. You think this lake belongs to the HOA? Then you're in for a rude awakening." The woman took out her phone and started dialing. "I'm calling the sheriff," she said coolly. "You can explain it to him." "Go ahead," Adam replied, arms crossed. "I'll be happy to." Within 30 minutes, a county sheriff's deputy arrived, an older man named Morales, who Adam vaguely remembered from town. He stepped out of his cruiser with a sigh, already looking weary of the situation. "All right," Morales said, adjusting his belt. "What's going on here?" The woman stepped forward first, speaking in a tone that suggested she believed authority was on her side. "Officer, this man is camping illegally on HOA property. We've had repeated issues with outsiders using this lake overnight. It's clearly marked in our community plans as a protected natural zone." Morales held up a hand, then turned to Adam. "That true, Adam? You camping here?" "I am," Adam replied. "But it's not illegal. This is my land. This ranch, this lake, it's all mine. Got the documents in my truck if you want to see them." Morales nodded. "Let's take a look." 5 minutes later, they were both leaning over the hood of Adam's truck. Adam pulled out a leather folder containing the deed, satellite maps, and a county-issued property survey. Morales examined the documents carefully. The maps clearly outlined the property lines, and the lake was well within Adam's borders. Morales whistled softly. "Well, looks like you're right. You're not only within your rights to be here, but it looks like the trail they came in on cuts across your land too." Adam nodded. "Exactly. They've been coming here for who knows how long, treating it like a park. I've been fixing fences for years without knowing they were the ones tearing them down." Morales walked back toward the HOA representatives. "You folks got it wrong. This is private land. He owns it outright. I suggest you don't come back here without permission." The man with the clipboard looked pale. The woman pursed her lips, clearly not used to being told she was wrong. But they didn't argue. Adam watched as they drove off in silence. The peace he'd come for was temporarily shaken, but something deeper stirred within him now. This wasn't over. If they thought they could claim his lake, then it was time to find out how deep their trespassing had really gone. The next few days after the incident were a blur of frustration and curiosity. Adam couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was going on. The sheer confidence with which the HOA reps had marched onto his land, the way they spoke as if the lake belonged to them, it didn't seem like a simple mistake. It felt orchestrated, entitled. They weren't confused, they were convinced. That was what bothered him the most. He returned home, but his mind stayed at the lake. The peace he'd sought had been shattered, but in its place came a sharp focus. He needed answers. If the HOA genuinely believed the lake was theirs, there had to be some paperwork, or lack thereof, feeding that belief. And if they'd gone as far as calling law enforcement to remove him from his own property, it was time to take this seriously. The first step was reviewing every piece of documentation he had. He pulled out the original deed his grandfather left him, the property boundary maps, and even old family photos that showed the land unchanged for decades. Everything clearly showed that the lake, the surrounding woods, and even the small trail leading down to the valley were all within the boundaries of the ranch. He even found a county-level survey from 15 years ago confirming it. So how on earth did the HOA think it belonged to them? Adam drove to the county records office and spent the better part of a day sifting through subdivision plats and development plans. Cedar Ridge HOA had been formed about a decade ago when the southern side of the town began rapidly expanding. Developers had bought up adjacent land to build upscale homes marketed as close to nature. Some of that development pressed up against the edge of his ranch's northern fence line, but never crossed it. But then he found something strange. A community plan filed 7 years ago had a public trail marked clearly around Lake Cedar, a lake that looked suspiciously like his lake. The trail connected to a greenbelt and picnic area, then wound back through HOA housing. But the problem was obvious. The trail crossed directly through his private property line, and the lake was clearly labeled as a shared recreational area. Adam's mouth went dry as he stared at the map. They hadn't just misused the lake. They had officially incorporated it into their community, as if it were theirs. He took copies of everything and made an appointment with a local land attorney. At the HOA law office, he laid out his documents, maps, and photos. The attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Dana Kerr, spent half an hour going through the files before leaning back in her chair. "They've been using your land without permission," she said plainly. "The HOA, or the developer, must have made a serious error, or maybe it wasn't an error at all. Either way, they've misrepresented ownership in official documents. That opens them up to liability." Adam rubbed his temples. "They've been hiking on my trails, fishing in my lake, and holding nature events out there. I've seen signs, picnic setups, even one of their newsletters talking about a family fishing day. All on my land." Dana nodded. "That's trespassing. And if they added that trail and lake to their public-facing documents knowingly, that's misrepresentation. Depending on how far it went, it could even count as fraud." The following week, Adam hired a licensed surveyor to remark the boundaries of his property with GPS accuracy. Bright orange flags were placed along the northern perimeter, wrapping cleanly around the lake and making it impossible to argue about ownership. The surveyor even identified where a footbridge had been built by HOA landscapers, smack in the middle of his private land. Adam returned to the ranch to inspect everything with fresh eyes. He found trail markers he had never placed, wooden benches near the water, and even a small laminated sign reading, "Lake Cedar, HOA members only." That was the final straw. He took photos, collected everything, and handed it over to Dana. She wasted no time. A cease and desist letter was sent to the Cedar Ridge HOA, along with a demand to remove all unauthorized structures and a warning of pending legal action. But even more revealing was what came next. Dana dug deeper and uncovered internal HOA emails, leaked from a whistleblower on the board. In them, a former HOA president openly discussed incorporating the natural lake into community amenities and how most people won't know the difference. They had knowingly crossed the line, literally and legally. Now Adam knew the truth. They weren't just mistaken. They had built their community dream on a lie, and his land. The following weekend, Adam returned to his ranch with a drone, a high-resolution camera, and a renewed sense of purpose. What began as a peaceful camping trip had turned into a full-blown investigation into how deeply the Cedar Ridge HOA had embedded themselves into land they had no legal claim to. armed with proof from the attorney and the surveyor, Adam planned to gather the final pieces of the puzzle himself. If the HOA had been trespassing, there would be signs, foot traffic, structures, trash, maybe even surveillance equipment. The air was cool as he walked the northern boundary of the lake, his boots crunching along a path that looked too manicured to be natural. As he moved deeper into the trail system, he started noticing subtle things. Fresh mulch in places he hadn't touched in years, cut branches neatly piled to the side, and polished trail signs with arrows pointing toward different stations. He took photos of every one. Then he spotted something even more damning. A series of benches nestled under a canopy of trees, with placards attached to each one. They read, "Donated by the Williams family, in honor of HOA Community Week." One even had a QR code linking to the Cedar Ridge website. Adam scanned it, and sure enough, it brought up a full page on Lake Cedar Nature Loop, complete with photos taken right from his property. This wasn't an accidental encroachment. This was organized, funded, and promoted as an official community asset. Adam launched his drone and let it soar above the lake, capturing sweeping shots of the land and all the unauthorized structures that dotted it. Benches, signs, gravel walkways, even a small wooden gazebo near the far end of the trail. He hadn't been back in that direction in over a year, and he was stunned by how much had changed. They'd built a whole nature park on his land, piece by piece, as if no one would ever question it. As he made his way around the lake, he noticed something else. A faded trail camera strapped to a tree with a motion sensor pointed directly at the dock. He approached it and realized it wasn't his. He hadn't set up any cameras on this part of the property. It looked newer, cleaner, out of place. When he removed the SD card and checked the footage later, it showed dozens of residents walking the trail, having picnics, fishing off his dock, even swimming in the lake. He could feel the anger simmering now. It wasn't just disrespect, it was theft, plain and simple. Back in town, Adam met again with Dana Kerr. Together they compiled the new evidence, photos, video, drone footage, and screenshots from the HOA's own website. The cease and desist had been delivered, but now it was time for something stronger. Dana began drafting a formal trespassing complaint and a claim for damages, which included the cost of restoring the property, removing unauthorized structures, and emotional distress from the false accusations that started it all. But that wasn't all. Dana also reached out to the county assessor's office and the zoning board. The inclusion of Adam's land in HOA documents and maps constituted a falsification of public records. If the HOA had claimed it as community property and used it to increase the value of their homes, they might face serious legal repercussions, including fines and lawsuits from their own members. Word spread quickly once the notice was served to the HOA board. Within days, Adam started receiving emails, some apologetic, others defensive. One even tried to argue that the land was functionally community space due to years of uninterrupted use. Dana laughed at that. "They're trying to invoke adverse possession," she said, "but they're out of luck. They never paid taxes on it, never had exclusive use, and you never abandoned it. You've maintained this land. You've got records, and now you've got proof." Then came the unexpected twist. A former HOA board member, disillusioned and quietly bitter about how things had been handled, reached out to Adam through Dana. He provided emails, internal documents, and meeting notes that showed the board knew the land didn't belong to them as far back as 5 years ago. One memo even said, "We should keep quiet about the lake boundary. If he hasn't made an issue of it by now, he probably won't." They had gambled on Adam staying silent. They lost that bet. Armed with a mountain of evidence and legal momentum, Adam realized this wasn't just about reclaiming his land. It was about accountability. The HOA had spent years building their little empire by eroding the rights of the very people they were supposed to represent. But this time, they had crossed the wrong fence, and now he was going to make sure they answered for it. The courthouse was quiet the morning Adam arrived for the hearing. He wasn't nervous, not anymore. He had everything he needed: proof, witnesses, documents, drone footage, legal support. Still, there was a certain weight in the air, the kind that comes when you know the truth is finally about to be dragged out into the open. Dana walked beside him, calm and confident. She'd seen cases like this before, but even she had admitted this one stood out for its boldness. Not many HOA boards had the audacity to build a park on someone else's private land and then try to police the actual owner off it. Inside the courtroom, several members of the Cedar Ridge HOA board sat stiffly in their seats. The president, Paul Forrester, avoided Adam's gaze. The woman who had called the sheriff that day, Rhonda, he now knew, sat with her arms crossed tightly over her chest. They looked more uncomfortable than angry now, their once confident expressions replaced with the kind of brittle composure that cracks under pressure. Adam figured they finally understood how badly they had misjudged the situation. The judge listened carefully as Dana laid out the facts. She presented the property deed, the official surveys, and years of tax records showing Adam's undisputed ownership of the lake and surrounding land. She showed photos and videos of unauthorized structures, some of which were even listed in the HOA's own newsletters as community amenities. And then to top it off, she submitted the internal emails from the former board member that proved the HOA had known the land wasn't theirs. Paul's attorney tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that the board had inherited bad information from the original developer, that there was no malice, just a simple error in documentation. But Dana wasn't having it. Even if it began as a mistake, she said, her voice firm, you continued to build on land that didn't belong to you. You misrepresented that land to your members, used it to justify fees, and you sent enforcement personnel to harass the rightful owner. That is not a mistake. That is negligence at best and fraud at worst. After several hours of back and forth, the judge ruled in Adam's favor. The HOA was ordered to pay damages for trespassing and illegal use of private property. They were given 30 days to dismantle all structures they had built on Adam's land and update their community maps and promotional materials. A formal apology from the board was to be mailed to every resident in the neighborhood, explaining the truth about the lake and acknowledging their misrepresentation. And perhaps most satisfying of all, the judge affirmed that Adam had every right to enforce his boundaries however he saw fit going forward. Outside the courthouse, reporters and curious residents had gathered after hearing whispers about the case. Adam didn't say much, just confirmed that the land was private, had always been private, and would remain that way. Back at the ranch, a quiet transformation began. Within days, contractors arrived to remove benches, signs, and the gazebo. The once busy trails went silent. Cameras were pulled down. The lake was his again, just as it had always been, but this time there were no illusions, no outsiders treating it like a public park. Adam installed new fencing along the north side of the property, this time with tall, clearly visible signs reading, "Private property, no trespassing." He added a few discreet security cameras and even upgraded the old gate at the trailhead with a locking system and motion sensor lights. Not to intimidate anyone, just to make sure no one forgot again. Surprisingly, the apology letters caused a ripple effect within Cedar Ridge. Some residents were angry, not at Adam but at their own board for lying to them. Others were embarrassed. A few even emailed Adam privately to thank him for standing his ground. One man, a longtime resident, wrote, "We always thought it was too good to be true. Now we know it was." Adam didn't respond to most of them. He didn't feel the need. His message had already been sent, loud and clear. That weekend he returned to the lake alone. No commotion, no SUVs rolling up the trail, no strangers walking through the trees. Just him, the dock, a fishing pole, and the sound of wind in the reeds. He lit a small fire and sat in his old canvas chair, the same one he'd brought out during that first weekend, what felt like a lifetime ago. He watched the sun dip below the ridge, casting golden light across the still water. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, he felt like he could finally relax again. Not just because the fight was over, but because justice had been served. The lake, once borrowed by liars, belonged once again to the man who respected it. And this time, everyone knew it.